Good. How are you?
Good. All right. Let's take this easy one on 27 to begin with.
Right.
Is that 4 over 7x, or is that a negative sign in front of the 4?
It's a negative sign.
The key on all of these is going to be how do you find the least common denominator? How would I get the least common denominator here?
On here, you just multiply them together.
You don't necessarily need to multiply them all together. In other words, that would give me 21x squared. Okay? Which would be a common denominator, but it's not the least common denominator. What would be a smaller common denominator that works?
Just 21x.
Yeah. Notice why. In other words, the only requirement we have for a least common denominator is both terms have to divide into it evenly. Well, 7x goes into 21x 3 times. 3x goes into 21x 7 times. So that works as a least common denominator, and it did not require me to multiply 3x times 7x to get it. I could have used 21x squared as a common denominator, but it wouldn't have been the least. And that makes the problem more difficult if I'm not using the least common denominator. So what goes here and here?
It'd be a 3 on the 4 over 7x.
Now remember how we do it. We divide 7x into our common denominator, and then we take that answer and we multiply it by the numerator.
All right, so 12.
Minus 12. And the key thing, every time you do one of these steps, make sure that what you end up with is what you started with. In other words, minus 4 over 7x is exactly the same as minus 12 over 21x. How about over here?
It would be minus or 35.
Now that we have a common denominator, we can operate on the numerators only. What's the numerator, the new one?
47 over 21.
Minus 47.
Yeah.
So there's your answer. Can't simplify it anymore, so that's it. So that's the only difficulty on these where you have a variable in the denominator, is your least common denominator is not always just the product of those. Sometimes you can get by with less than the product of those. Let's look at 28. I'm going to write it out like this. What's the least common denominator going to be here?
Will it be 6x minus 12? Would that be the least common denominator?
Let's not put them together yet. In other words, we know that one of the common denominators would be that times that, right?
Yeah.
That would be 36 times x minus 2 times x. I don't need 36. 6 will do just fine. Hold on, let me write it so you can read it. Now, why is this a least common denominator? Because this will divide into it x amount of times, which is an even number, x. This divides into it x minus 2 amount of times. So
Okay.
normally when you just multiply the variables times one another and leave them in factored form like this, that's going to be your common denominator. Sometimes you can get away with not multiplying them outright. In other words, if this was an x squared, well, all I would need to do is make that x squared like that, and now it would be a least common denominator. I don't need to necessarily multiply the sixes. All right, so let's finish this problem. What goes here?
Which be 7x.
And what goes here?
X plus 1.
Well, remember how I get it. I take 6x, I divide it into my common denominator, and then I multiply it by the new numerator, or the old numerator. Well, the old numerator was x plus 3. Divide 6x into that, what do you get?
X minus 2.
Okay. So yes, now we have a common denominator. We can simplify the numerators and distribute. So what is x plus 3 times x minus 2?
It's x squared plus x minus 6.
Okay. So here's what I have now. I have 7x minus this quantity. And whenever this is a minus, make sure you use parentheses, because it will change your answer if you do or don't. Notice that as long as I use parentheses, I can do this. If I don't, when I remove those parentheses, it's going to change the sign on the x term and the 6 term. So what does the numerator become?
X squared.
Minus x squared.
Minus x squared plus 6x plus 6.
Good. All divided by 6 times x minus 2 times x. Okay?
Yep.
'29 is another one where we don't need, in other words, what's the common denominator going to be on 29?
X minus 6.
No. First of all, the common denominator has got to be at least as big as the biggest denominator. Because whatever I come up with for my common denominator, this has to divide into it evenly. So does this. So it has to be at least x squared minus 9. Now, I could multiply this times that and be assured of having a common denominator. But do I need to do that? That might make it too big. I'm going to maintain, because I can see that if I factor this left side, now what's my common denominator?
This is x minus 3, x plus 3.
Okay, which leaves this numerator the same. What goes here?
4x plus 12.
Simplify the numerators.
$10x plus 13.
All over that denominator. So this is another case where when you see that, well, rather than multiply it outright, let's see if this divides into that. And if it does, then we already have a common denominator. We don't need to come up with a new one.
Yeah.
Should we look at just the circled ones?
Yeah. Or all of them are circled on that.
I don't see 30. Is 30 circled?
Yeah, it's just really faint.
Okay, let's do 30. Now, most of these, you can bet that when you have a quadratic in one of them, factor that. One of those factors is going to be x minus 7. So let's rewrite it in factored form. What is this quadratic factor to?
X minus 7, x plus 2.
What's our least common denominator going to be?
X minus 7, x plus 2.
Okay. So the right-hand side turns into what?
It's 2x plus 4.
All right. And then you just add that to that and put it all over that common denominator. Do you need me to finish each of these, or setting them up is good enough?
I'm just having trouble on the common denominator.
Let's just set them up, and we'll go from there. You can do the arithmetic, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Factor the left-hand denominator.
It's 4 and 2, so x minus 4? No, x plus 4, x minus 2.
So that, again, is going to be our least common denominator because you have an x plus 4 over here. So I know that x plus 4 times x minus 2 is my least common denominator. You see why?
Yeah.
Okay. And what goes here?
6x minus 12.
Like that?
Yeah.
No. In parentheses. No. If I leave off those parentheses, then when I act on the numerator, I'm going to be subtracting 12, and I don't want to subtract 12. I want to subtract a negative 12. So whenever this is a negative sign, those parentheses are absolutely critical. They will change your answer. Now operate on the numerator. What do you get?
Minus 6x plus 12.
Well, you have to combine it with that.
Oh. So minus x plus 11.
Good. All over that.
All right.
Okay, 32 looks a little different. What is a least common denominator going to be here?
It's going to be 3x plus 5. Doesn't that have to be there?
It's got to be part of it, but is that alone going to be a least common denominator?
No.
No, because x plus 8 does not divide evenly into it. Well, what would be divisible by both of these denominators?
I don't know.
Always a common denominator is going to be the product of both of them. In this case, that's also a least common denominator. You don't always have to take the product of them. In other words, if I go back to 28, I didn't multiply 6x times 6x minus 12 to come up with my common denominator. I was able to figure out that I didn't need 36. I just needed 6 of it. But in this one, 3x plus 5 has nothing in common with x plus 8. And so a least common denominator happens to be the same thing as a common denominator, which is just the product of them. Okay? Now what goes in the top left? Write it before you multiply it together. Let's write it like...
Alright, so 4x squared plus, 4x squared and x plus 8.
Yeah. Just make sure you have the same thing you started with. And I can now cross out the x plus 8, and I've got what I started with. How about over here?
10, then 3x plus 5.
And again, that it's good to put a double parentheses around there, because otherwise I could get the sign wrong on this number part here. Okay, let's multiply that out. It's the upper left numerator.
4x cubed plus 32x squared.
And the rest of it?
Minus 10 or 30x minus 50.
Good. You did it all in one step, but if you were going to do these in individual steps, I would remove the inside parentheses first, making it 30x plus 50. And now when you remove the outside parentheses, you got minus 30x minus 50. And then, that's already combined, so there's really nothing else needed to do there. See, that was 32. Yeah, let's do 33. I don't need to rewrite it. Tell me what a common denominator is going to be.
It would just be the multiples of each of them.
I know what you meant. Yeah, if you can't find something that's less than that, then that's always it. And it doesn't hurt, actually. You'll get the right answer even if you don't use the least common denominator. You can always multiply the two denominators and come up with a common denominator. It just isn't always the least. But if your two factors don't share anything in common, like these two, then it's just the straight product. Okay, what goes on the top left?
So, Turks, and then 3x plus 2.
This is actually a better way of writing it, I think. Because when you write it like this, where everything hasn't been multiplied together yet, then you can see right off that I can cancel that with that, and I have exactly what I started with. And that's the key, is to make sure you do not change the value of that fraction. Whenever you're finding common denominators, that's vital. So right away I'm going to put my 3x plus 2 over there, and I got 1.
It wouldn't be 3x plus 2 on that.
Right. Thank you. I messed up there. That'd be x minus 10 in parentheses. Now, it turns out in this case, we don't really need the parentheses because we're adding. We're not going to get a sign messed up if we leave them off. But just as a standard practice, I think it's always good to put the parentheses there. That'll always work, whether that's a plus or a minus. And then, of course, the next step would be to multiply these two together remove the parentheses, simplify the numerator.
All right.
That was 33,
Mm-hmm.
34. When you see a quadratic in one part, well, what's one of those factors almost certainly going to be?
X minus 8
X plus 8? Yeah.
minus... Oh, no.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It is X minus 8. I had it covered up enough that I was reading 32. So, our common denominator is going to be X plus 8. What's the other factor? What the heck am I doing here? Oh, yeah, no, we're all right. We're on 34, yeah.
And X plus 4.
Okay. So I haven't really changed this side of it.
No, it'd be X minus 4. It'd be X minus 8X minus 4. I screwed up because it's...
No, you're right. I was the one that made that mistake because I wrote X plus 8 to begin with. Okay. Does that work? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the top is X squared plus X minus 3. And over here we have X minus 8 times X minus 4. So the top right on 34 is what?
It'd be 3X squared.
Yeah, let's just leave it unmultiplied for the moment.
Oh. And then, yeah.
See kind of the advantage of leaving it unmultiplied? Is that it's real easy to take those out and realize what you have left is what you started with. In fact, that mistake that I almost made, I probably wouldn't have made. I would have caught myself. So simplify the top. Make sure you can do this.
So it's negative 2X squared minus...
Hold on. Is it plus or minus 2X squared?
It's minus...
Let's
It's
do it.
minus
Let's do
2.
it step by step. Tell me what to write next.
So it's minus 3X squared plus 12X.
Okay. Now that's what we want to simplify. So that becomes minus X squared. A lot of times trying to do two steps in one is just asking for a mistake.
No, wouldn't it be minus 2X?
Minus 2X squared. How many X's do we have?
13.
And our numbers are minus 3. So that is our new numerator. And our new denominator is that common denominator. Okay. 35, a little different, a little harder. To begin 35, what should I do?
Just factor.
Factor both denominators. Only after I get them into linear factors am I going to be able to tell what the lowest common denominator is going to be. This one goes to what?
4 and 4. X plus 4, X plus 4.
And this one?
X minus 4, X plus 4.
So what common denominator would be divisible by both of these denominators?
Would be x plus 4, x plus 4, x minus 4.
Very good. So what goes top left? Write it as in factored form.
So already factored. So
Yeah, don't multiply it together yet. Let's make sure we do every step.
oh, 2x plus 1.
In parentheses.
Yeah, and then parentheses x minus 4.
Okay. You see the advantage of writing it like that is I can instantly tell whether I've done it properly or not. And on the left?
It's 3 and then parentheses x plus 4.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So what is the numerator? What's the next line I want to write for the numerator?
It's 2x squared plus minus 8x. Oh yeah, minus 7. And then minus 4. And then minus 3x minus 12.
Good. Okay. Good. Partial fraction, John?
I don't think so.
It's odd. I had a student who had partial fraction problems the other night, and I only get that about once a year. It's not like every school district covers it. Decomposing partial fractions is pretty fun. Pretty tough, but pretty fun. It's kind of the opposite of what we're doing. In other words, you start out with something that's been found a common denominator, and you try to decompose it into its individual fractions. In other words, you start out with our answer, and you try to get it back into the original form. What's the least common denominator going to be here?
It would be x plus 1 multiplied by 2x plus minus 3.
Is that a common denominator?
Or do you have to add the x?
Well, it has to satisfy the definition we're looking for. In other words, every denominator has to divide into that evenly. X does not divide into that evenly.
Okay, so you have to add x to it too?
Yep. Now, this divides into it evenly, this divides into it evenly, and that divides into it evenly. So that's the key thing. You have to have a common denominator that is divided by everything. It goes upper left.
So it's 4x, then parentheses 2x minus 3, and then x.
Okay. In the middle?
It would be x plus 1, and then x.
And on the right side?
It would be 4, and then x plus 1, and then 2x minus 3.
And the only mistake you can really make is based on that minus sign right there. You got to be careful. Everything else will work out pretty easily, but that minus sign, you have to make sure that gets distributed all the way over to that 3. Okay? All right. That's probably a pretty good session there. We covered a lot. I hope that straightens it out for you.
Yeah.
Okay. I will talk to you on Saturday, Mitch. Is that right? This is Wednesday.
Yeah.